Sheriff Marcus Kane discovered his wife's betrayal hidden in their own home, a revelation that shattered his world and consumed his thoughts. But 3 months later, what he did in response would shock the entire county and leave a family forever changed. The man who had sworn to protect and serve was about to cross a line that would destroy everything he had built, and the consequences would be far more devastating than anyone could have imagined. In the quiet hills of Willowbrook County, Tennessee, where everyone knew their neighbors and trust ran as deep as the mountain roots, no one expected that their most respected lawman would become the very threat they needed protection from. But betrayal has a way of turning even the most honorable people into someone they never thought they could become. What Marcus found in his own desk drawer, that cold February evening, would set in motion a chain of events that would test the limits of human nature, reveal the true cost of revenge, and prove that sometimes the most dangerous person is the one you trust the most. Marcus Kane had been the sheriff of Willowbrook County for 8 years, and before that, he had served as a deputy for another 6. At 42 years old, he commanded respect not just because of his badge, but because of his character. Standing 6 feet 2 inches tall with graying temples and steady blue eyes, Marcus had the kind of presence that made people feel safe just by being in the same room. The people of Willowbrook County, population 8,400, trusted Marcus with their lives, their secrets, and their peace of mind. He was the man they called when domestic disputes got out of hand, when teenagers went missing after house parties, and when the occasional break-in rattled the community. Marcus handled each case with the same methodical precision and genuine care that had earned him 3 consecutive elections without serious opposition. His wife Isabella was equally well regarded in their tight-knit community. At 38, she had built a successful real estate business from nothing, helping families find their dream homes throughout the county and the neighboring areas. With her warm smile, auburn hair, and natural ability to make anyone feel comfortable, Isabella had become the go-to agent for anyone looking to buy or sell property within a 50-mile radius. The Kanes had been married for 12 years. Ever since Isabella moved to Willowbrook County from Nashville to start fresh after her divorce from her first husband. Marcus had been a deputy then, and their courtship had been the talk of the town. Everyone said they were perfect for each other, and for over a decade, that seemed to be true. They lived in a beautiful 2-story colonial house on Elm Street, just a few blocks from the courthouse where Marcus worked. The house had been Isabella's idea when they got married. She said it would be perfect for the family they planned to have, with its 4 bedrooms and large backyard. But children never came, despite years of trying and hoping, and eventually they stopped talking about it. Instead, they poured their energy into their work and their community. Marcus served on the school board and coached Little League Baseball every summer. Isabella organized the annual Christmas charity drive and volunteered at the animal shelter every weekend. To everyone who knew them, the Kanes represented the best of small-town American values: hard work, community service, and unwavering commitment to each other. Marcus's deputies respected him deeply. His second-in-command, Lieutenant Rebecca Torres, often said that working for Marcus had made her a better officer and a better person. Deputy Kyle Morrison, the youngest member of the force at 25, looked up to Marcus like a father figure. Even the county commissioners, who rarely agreed on anything, unanimously praised Marcus's leadership and his department's effectiveness. The county had seen its crime rate drop by 30% during Marcus's tenure as sheriff. Drug-related incidents were down, property crimes were at historic lows, and violent crime was virtually non-existent. Marcus had achieved this not through aggressive policing, but through community engagement and building relationships with the people he served. Isabella's real estate business, Kane Properties, had grown steadily over the years. She had expanded beyond residential sales to include commercial properties and land development consulting. Her office on Main Street employed 3 other agents, and her annual sales volume consistently ranked her among the top realtors in the region. The couple seemed to have everything a small-town American family could want: successful careers, community respect, financial security, and what appeared to be a strong, loving marriage. They attended church together every Sunday at First Baptist, where Isabella sang in the choir, and Marcus served as a deacon. They hosted an annual barbecue for the sheriff's department and their families every 4th of July. But beneath the surface of their seemingly perfect life, cracks had begun to form. Marcus had started working longer hours, taking on additional responsibilities that kept him at the office well into the evening. Isabella's business trips to Nashville and Memphis had become more frequent, sometimes lasting several days at a time. They both attributed these changes to the natural evolution of their careers, never suspecting that their growing time apart was creating space for something that would ultimately destroy everything they had built together. February 14th, Valentine's Day, should have been a celebration of their love. Marcus had planned to surprise Isabella with dinner at the expensive steakhouse in the county seat, followed by a weekend getaway to the mountains. He came home early from the office, bouquet of red roses in hand, ready to remind his wife why they had fallen in love all those years ago. Isabella was not home yet, which was not unusual given her busy schedule, so Marcus decided to wait in his home office while finishing up some paperwork. Their house had always been his sanctuary, the one place where he could truly relax and let his guard down. Isabella had decorated their shared office space with family photos and mementos from their travels together, creating an environment that reflected their partnership in all aspects of life. Marcus sat down at the large oak desk they shared, pulling out the files he needed to review before the weekend. As he opened the center drawer to grab a pen, his hand brushed against something that did not belong there, a small, unfamiliar cell phone tucked behind the usual office supplies. At first, Marcus assumed it was an old phone that Isabella had forgotten about, perhaps a backup device from her business. But when he picked it up and saw that it was still charged and active, curiosity got the better of him. The screen showed dozens of unread messages and missed calls from a contact listed simply as N. Marcus told himself he was just being thorough, that there was probably an innocent explanation. Perhaps Isabella was helping a friend with a difficult situation, or maybe this was related to a confidential real estate transaction. But as he scrolled through the messages, his heart began to pound with a rhythm he recognized from high-stress police situations. The messages were intimate, romantic and explicit. They spoke of secret meetings, stolen moments, and a passion that Marcus recognized but had not seen directed toward him in years. The timestamps showed that these communications had been going on for months, with messages exchanged almost daily, sometimes multiple times per day. "Cannot wait to hold you again," one message read. "Every moment apart feels like forever. Last night was incredible," read another. "I have never felt this way about anyone." The most recent message, sent just that afternoon, made Marcus's blood run cold. "Happy Valentine's Day, my love. I wish we could spend it together openly, but soon we will not have to hide anymore." Marcus set the phone down with trembling hands, his mind racing to process what he had just discovered. His wife of 12 years, the woman he had trusted completely, was having an affair. The betrayal hit him like a physical blow, leaving him gasping for air in the chair, where he had spent countless peaceful evenings. But the worst was yet to come. Among the photos stored on the phone were pictures that Isabella had taken in their own home, in their own bedroom, with a man Marcus recognized immediately. Deputy District Attorney Nathan Cross. Nathan Cross was 34 years old, newly appointed to his position after moving to Tennessee from Atlanta. He was everything Marcus was not: young, sophisticated, and ambitious, with plans to run for district attorney in the next election. Marcus had worked with Nathan on several cases over the past year, and had found him to be competent, if somewhat arrogant. Never in his worst nightmares had Marcus imagined that Nathan was sleeping with his wife. The evidence was overwhelming and undeniable. Credit card statements showed expensive hotel rooms and dinners for two. There were photos of Isabella and Nathan together at restaurants in neighboring counties, holding hands and kissing like teenagers. Most painful of all were the love letters that Nathan had written, expressing his desire to build a life with Isabella and his frustration with having to keep their relationship secret. Marcus sat in his office for 3 hours that evening, reading every message, examining every photo, and trying to understand how his life had fallen apart without him even noticing. When Isabella finally came home at 9 o'clock, apologizing for working late on a difficult contract, Marcus said nothing. He smiled, accepted her kiss on the cheek, and told her he understood that business came first. That night, lying next to his wife in the bed they had shared for over a decade, Marcus stared at the ceiling and felt something dark and cold taking root in his chest. The man who had dedicated his life to justice and fairness began to contemplate a different kind of justice entirely, the kind that would not involve courts, or lawyers, or due process, the kind that would be personal, permanent, and devastating. The 3 months that followed Marcus's discovery transformed him from a respected lawman into something far more dangerous, a man with nothing left to lose, and the skills to act on his darkest impulses. While he maintained his professional facade during the day, his evenings and weekends became consumed with surveillance, planning, and feeding, the growing rage that threatened to devour him entirely. Marcus began documenting Isabella's every move, with the same methodical precision he applied to criminal investigations. He installed tracking software on her legitimate phone, monitored her credit card usage, and used his law enforcement resources to run background checks on Nathan Cross that went far beyond what was legal or ethical. What he discovered about Nathan only fueled his anger. The deputy district attorney had a history of inappropriate relationships with married women, including a scandal in Atlanta that had been quietly covered up by his politically connected family. Nathan came from money, old Atlanta money, and had used his connections to land the position in Tennessee when his reputation in Georgia became too tarnished to continue. Isabella, Marcus realized, was not Nathan's first victim, and she would not be his last. The man was a predator who targeted successful, lonely women and used his charm and sophistication to manipulate them into affairs that he eventually abandoned when they became inconvenient. But Isabella had fallen completely under Nathan's influence. Marcus watched through hidden cameras as she prepared for their secret meetings, saw how her face lit up when Nathan's messages arrived, and listened through recording devices as she lied to her friends and family about her whereabouts. The woman he had loved and trusted for 12 years had become a stranger, willing to destroy everything they had built together for a man who saw her as nothing more than a temporary diversion. Marcus's behavior at work began to change in subtle ways that his deputies attributed to stress. He became more irritable, more demanding, and increasingly paranoid about security protocols. He started carrying his service weapon at all times, even during administrative duties that had never required it before. Lieutenant Torres noticed that Marcus had lost weight and seemed to be sleeping poorly, but when she expressed concern, he brushed off her questions with curt responses that discouraged further inquiry. The sheriff's department operated from a building that had been constructed in the 1970s, with holding cells in the basement and administrative offices on the main floor. Marcus's office was at the end of the hallway, providing him with privacy that he now used to plan something that would have horrified anyone who knew him. He researched Nathan's daily routines, mapped out his routes to and from work, and identified the times and places where he was most vulnerable. Marcus also began making preparations that went beyond simple surveillance. He opened a safety deposit box at a bank in the neighboring county, paying for it with cash, and using identification that would be difficult to trace back to him quickly. He purchased a prepaid cell phone and established several alibis for the day he planned to act, including scheduling official meetings that would place him far from the scene when Nathan Cross's world came crashing down. But Marcus's planning went beyond simply confronting Nathan. He wanted to destroy the man completely, to take away everything that Nathan valued, just as Nathan had taken away everything that Marcus valued. This meant targeting not just Nathan himself, but his career, his reputation, and his family. Nathan was married to a woman named Victoria Cross, a pediatric nurse at the county hospital, who had no idea about her husband's infidelities. They had 2 young children, a boy of 7 and a girl of 5, who attended the elementary school where Marcus had coached Little League. The idea of destroying an innocent family troubled the part of Marcus that was still a decent man. But that voice was growing quieter with each passing day. Marcus's plan was elegant in its simplicity and devastating in its scope. He would confront Nathan at his home on a Saturday afternoon, when Victoria and the children were visiting her parents in Nashville, a weekly routine that Marcus had confirmed through surveillance. He would present Nathan with all the evidence of his affair with Isabella, along with evidence of his previous affairs and professional misconduct. Nathan would have a choice: resign from his position, confess everything to his wife, and leave Tennessee forever, or face the consequences of having his crimes exposed publicly. Marcus was confident that Nathan's arrogance and sense of entitlement would prevent him from choosing the sensible option, which would give Marcus the justification he needed for what came next. The confrontation would take place in Nathan's home, surrounded by photos of his family and reminders of the life he had built through deception and manipulation. Marcus would make sure that Nathan understood exactly what he was losing and why he was losing it. And if Nathan tried to fight back or refused to cooperate, Marcus was prepared to use whatever force was necessary to ensure compliance. But Marcus's plan had a fatal flaw that he was too consumed with rage to recognize. He had become so focused on destroying Nathan Cross that he had failed to consider what would happen to Isabella, to himself, or to the community that trusted him. The sheriff, who had spent his career protecting innocent people, was about to become the very threat he had sworn to defend against. And when the confrontation finally came, the truth would prove to be even more devastating than the lies that had started it all. Saturday, May 18th, dawned clear and warm, the kind of perfect spring day that made Willowbrook County feel like paradise. Marcus had barely slept the night before, his mind running through every detail of what he planned to do. Isabella had left early that morning, for what she claimed was a property showing in Memphis. But Marcus knew she was really meeting Nathan at their usual hotel. The thought of them together, while he prepared to destroy their secret world, filled him with a cold satisfaction that scared him even as it drove him forward. At 2 o'clock in the afternoon, Marcus parked his personal truck 3 blocks from Nathan's house on Birch Street, a quiet residential neighborhood where the deputy district attorney had purchased a modest colonial home similar to Marcus's own. The irony was not lost on him that Nathan had built his life as a mirror image of what he was trying to steal. Marcus had changed out of his uniform into civilian clothes, but he carried his service weapon and badge, along with a manila envelope containing copies of all the evidence he had gathered over the past 3 months. His hands were steady, his mind clear, and his heart filled with the righteous anger of a man who had been betrayed by everyone he trusted most. The Cross House was exactly as Marcus had observed during his surveillance, well maintained but unremarkable, with a small front yard and a 2-car garage. Nathan's silver sedan was in the driveway, confirming that he was home and alone. Marcus had verified that Victoria and the children were indeed visiting her parents, their social media posts showing them at a Nashville park just 2 hours earlier. Marcus walked up the front sidewalk with the confident stride of a law enforcement officer conducting official business. When Nathan answered the door, his face showed immediate concern at seeing the sheriff standing on his doorstep on a Saturday afternoon. "Marcus," Nathan said, his politician's smile failing to hide his nervousness. "What brings you by? Is everything all right?" "We need to talk," Marcus replied, his voice calm and professional. "May I come in?" Nathan hesitated for just a moment, but his training as a lawyer kicked in, and he stepped aside to allow Marcus into his home. The living room was decorated with family photos and children's artwork, creating an atmosphere of domestic happiness that made Marcus's anger burn even hotter. "Can I offer you something to drink?" Nathan asked, still trying to maintain the pretense that this was a social visit. "This is not a social call," Marcus said, setting the manila envelope on Nathan's coffee table. "I think you know why I am here." Nathan's face went pale as he recognized the implications of Marcus's words and demeanor. He moved toward the kitchen, perhaps hoping to create some distance, but Marcus followed him, maintaining eye contact with the intensity that had intimidated countless criminals over the years. "I do not know what you think you know," Nathan began, but Marcus cut him off with a raised hand. "I know about Isabella," Marcus said quietly. "I know about the hotels, the restaurants, the messages, the photos you took in my house, in my bedroom. I know about your history in Atlanta, and I know about the other women you have manipulated and discarded." Nathan's lawyer instincts kicked in, and he began to calculate his options. "Marcus, if you have concerns about my professional conduct, there are proper channels." "The proper channels?" Marcus laughed, a sound devoid of humor. "You mean like the proper channels that protected you in Atlanta? Like the proper channels that would protect you here while you destroy my marriage and move on to your next victim?" The confrontation escalated quickly from there. Nathan, cornered and desperate, made the mistake of trying to justify his actions, claiming that Isabella had pursued him, that Marcus had neglected his wife, that their marriage had been over long before he arrived in Tennessee. Each word was like gasoline on the fire of Marcus's rage. But then Nathan said something that stopped Marcus cold. You want to know the truth, Marcus? Isabella is planning to leave you anyway. She has been saving money, consulting with divorce lawyers, preparing to start a new life. I am not the cause of your marriage ending. I am just the excuse she needed to finally walk away from a life she has been unhappy with for years. Marcus felt the world shift beneath his feet. You are lying. Am I? Nathan reached into a kitchen drawer and pulled out a folder. She asked me to review these documents for her. Divorce papers. Marcus. Financial statements showing accounts you do not know about. She has been planning this for months, long before we became involved. Marcus opened the folder with trembling hands. The documents were real, detailed and devastating. Isabella had indeed been preparing to divorce him, had been hiding money in accounts he knew nothing about, and had been consulting with attorneys in Nashville about the best way to proceed. The affair with Nathan was not the cause of their marriage's destruction. It was simply the final act in a drama that had been playing out for much longer than Marcus had realized. But the discovery that broke Marcus completely was a letter in Isabella's handwriting, addressed to Nathan, but never sent. In it she described her marriage to Marcus as suffocating, called him controlling and emotionally absent, and expressed her relief at finally finding someone who sees me as more than just a sheriff's wife. The letter went on to detail Isabella's plans to take half of everything they owned, including the house Marcus loved, and move to Nashville to be closer to Nathan. She wrote about her excitement at starting over, her relief at not having to pretend to be happy anymore, and her hope that Marcus would eventually understand that their marriage had been a mistake from the beginning. Marcus read the letter twice, his anger transforming into something far more dangerous, complete emotional devastation, combined with access to weapons, and the skills to use them. When he looked up at Nathan, his eyes held a coldness that made the younger man step backward toward the living room. You destroyed my life, Marcus said quietly. Marcus, I understand you are upset, but violence is not going to solve anything, Nathan replied, his voice shaking as he continued backing away. But Marcus was beyond reason now. The confrontation that followed was brief, brutal, and would have been fatal if not for a twist that neither man saw coming. As Marcus advanced on Nathan, his service weapon drawn, Nathan stumbled backward over his daughter's bicycle, which had been left in the living room. Both men fell. Marcus's gun discharged into the ceiling, and Nathan's head struck the corner of his glass coffee table with a sickening sound that Marcus would never forget. Blood immediately began pooling beneath Nathan's head, and Marcus realized that his quest for revenge had gone far beyond what he had intended. Nathan was unconscious, possibly dying, and Marcus was standing over him, with a smoking gun in a house that was not his own. But the real twist came when Marcus heard a car door slam outside. Through the front window, he saw Victoria Cross getting out of her minivan, with her 2 children, having returned early from their trip to Nashville. What happened next would haunt Marcus Kane for the rest of his life. As he heard Victoria's key turning in the front door, Marcus faced a choice that would define not just his future, but his fundamental character as a human being. He could flee, leaving Nathan bleeding on the floor for his wife and children to discover, or he could stay and face the consequences of his actions. In that split second, the part of Marcus that was still a decent man, still a protector of the innocent, took control. He holstered his weapon and immediately began applying pressure to Nathan's head wound, using techniques he had learned in his years of law enforcement to slow the bleeding and stabilize the injured man. Victoria and her children walked into a scene that would traumatize them forever. Their husband and father, unconscious in a pool of blood, with the county sheriff kneeling beside him, his hands covered in blood, desperately trying to save the man's life. Call 911, Marcus told Victoria, his voice steady despite the chaos around him. Tell them we need an ambulance, and that Sheriff Kane is requesting immediate backup. Victoria, trained as a nurse, quickly assessed the situation and took over Nathan's medical care while her children huddled in the corner, crying and confused by what they were witnessing. Marcus stepped back and called his own department, reporting the incident and requesting that Lieutenant Torres respond to the scene. The next few hours passed in a blur of ambulances, police cars and investigators trying to piece together what had happened in the Cross family's living room. Nathan was rushed to the county hospital, where emergency surgery saved his life, but left him with permanent brain damage that would end his legal career and require years of rehabilitation. Marcus voluntarily surrendered his weapon and badge to Lieutenant Torres, who had to fight back tears as she read him his rights. The man who had been her mentor, her role model, and her friend, was now under arrest for assault with a deadly weapon, breaking and entering, and a dozen other charges that would likely send him to prison for the rest of his life. The investigation that followed revealed the full scope of Marcus's surveillance and planning, painting a picture of a man who had crossed every ethical and legal line in his quest for revenge. The evidence against him was overwhelming, much of it documented in his own meticulous records that investigators found in his home and office. But the investigation also revealed the truth about Isabella's affair and her plans to leave Marcus. Information that became public record during the court proceedings. The community that had respected both Canes for over a decade was forced to confront the reality that their perfect marriage had been a facade, and that even their most trusted public servants were capable of betrayal and violence. Isabella filed for divorce while Marcus was in jail awaiting trial, taking exactly half of everything they owned, just as she had planned. She moved to Nashville 2 weeks after Nathan was released from the hospital, abandoning not just her marriage, but also her business and all the relationships she had built in Willowbrook County. Nathan Cross survived, but the brain injury he sustained left him with memory problems, difficulty speaking, and chronic headaches that ended his legal career permanently. Victoria stood by her husband through his recovery, but their marriage never fully recovered from the trauma of that day. They eventually moved to Florida, where Nathan found work as a paralegal and tried to rebuild his life away from the shadow of what had happened. Marcus's trial became the biggest news story in Willowbrook County's history. The courtroom was packed every day with community members trying to understand how their sheriff had fallen so far. Marcus pled guilty to all charges, expressing remorse for his actions, but offering no excuse for what he had done. During his sentencing hearing, Marcus addressed the court and his community for the final time as a free man. "I took an oath to protect and serve, and I broke that oath in the worst possible way. I let my personal pain override my professional duty, and I hurt innocent people as a result. I do not ask for forgiveness, because what I did is unforgivable. I only ask that this community learn from my mistakes and choose healing over revenge, truth over deception, and hope over despair." Marcus was sentenced to 12 years in prison, with the possibility of parole after 8 years. He lost his pension, his reputation, and any possibility of working in law enforcement again. But during his incarceration, he began working with a prison counselor to understand how his need for control and his inability to process emotional pain had led him to become the very thing he had spent his career fighting against. Victoria Cross, despite everything that had happened, visited Marcus in prison 6 months after his sentencing. She told him that Nathan was making progress in his recovery, that their children were getting counseling to help them process the trauma they had witnessed, and that she had forgiven Marcus for what he had done to her family. "Forgiveness does not mean what you did was acceptable," she told him through the prison glass. "But holding on to anger and hatred would only create more victims. My children need to see that healing is possible, that people can choose to be better than their worst moments." Marcus served 7 years and 4 months of his sentence before being granted parole for good behavior and his participation in victim counseling programs. He was released on a cold December morning with no family to meet him and no clear idea of what his future would hold. The case of Marcus Kane serves as a stark reminder that betrayal and pain can transform even the most honorable people into something they never thought they could become. But it also demonstrates the power of choosing accountability over denial, healing over revenge, and redemption over destruction. Marcus now works at a halfway house in Memphis, helping other former inmates transition back into society. He will never be able to undo the damage he caused, but he has chosen to spend the rest of his life trying to prevent others from making the same mistakes that cost him everything he valued. Nathan Cross continues his recovery, working as an advocate for brain injury victims and speaking to law enforcement groups about the importance of mental health resources for officers dealing with personal trauma. His marriage to Victoria remains complicated, but they have found a way to build a new life together, based on complete honesty about their past and their ongoing challenges. The case changed Willowbrook County forever, leading to new policies requiring psychological evaluations for law enforcement officers and mandatory counseling for those dealing with personal crises. The community learned that even their most trusted leaders are human, capable of both great good and terrible harm, depending on the choices they make in their darkest moments. The lesson of Marcus Cain's fall from grace is not that good people are secretly evil, but that pain and betrayal can drive anyone to make choices they never thought possible. The difference between tragedy and redemption often comes down to a single moment of decision. Do we choose healing or revenge, truth or deception, hope or despair? If this case has resonated with you, I encourage you to share your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever faced a betrayal that tested your fundamental beliefs about right and wrong? How did you choose to respond? And what did you learn about yourself in the process? Remember to subscribe to True Crime Seat for more stories that explore the complex psychology behind real crimes, and hit that notification bell so you never miss an episode. Sometimes the most important lessons come from the darkest chapters of human experience, and together we can learn to choose light over darkness, healing over revenge, and hope over despair.